once all the program is finished, we will make sure these reading documents, presentations, other articles, and the recording is available to our participants for X many days. We'll communicate to you, and and then we will keep the camera on. Don't turn the camera off unless like you have to go on site or something. Keep yourself in mute, and let's avoid the distraction, because Zoom is very useful, but sometimes it could get really distractive. And and then we'll have like all the questions. As I said, it will be moderated by the moderators. And please stay until the end of the program, and then we will take a group picture end of the program every day. And everyone gets a certificate upon successful completion of the program. We'll have a small, we'll call it graduation or closing ceremony on Friday, end of the class. We may have few guests, one or two extra guests for that event. And we'll try to make it as fun as you can make online for graduation. I had to attend a graduation ceremony where we lots of kids in USA in high school and college, they couldn't go to the graduation, or none of them. So we hosted a small ceremony for our community kids who graduated online, and it was lots of fun because we had a music, we had a dance, and we had everything. But we're not going to have music and dance part, but we'll do the rest. And and I'll just give you a background of this program. So we have been working with teachers and principals and and we launched school executive leadership program few years ago. And about 6 months ago, we partnered with Singapore Education Group, and you will see Dr. Gopinathan and Dr. Prashad and his team online. And we launched this program to be in Singapore in March 2020. But as we all know, the entire world changed since March 2020. So I've personally seen, even as a parent and even as a trainer, I've seen a big impact of COVID on education sector. And we immediately canceled our program and organized a number of webinars. And hopefully some of you had opportunity to join our free webinars. We had 3 or 4 of them on education. And following webinars, we again had a brainstorm session on what can we do? What can we do, and what does a principal or an administrator or a policymaker or even the instructional leader needs at this moment while we're dealing with COVID-19. And we'd say, like, the one thing that everybody needs right now is to be calm. So yes, we all are working on making sure that teachers are developing high quality lessons, answering questions about content and teaching, and helping troubleshoot along the way. The teachers start using digital platform. Teachers are until recently, teachers were not trained to sit online and do training. Lots of countries have a required training program for teachers to go through, but they didn't go through that kind of training. So it's a whole new change for all of us, right? So I always tell people that, buildings are closed, not the education. Education continues. So now we are managing not just the students, not just the school buildings, but we are managing parents and guardians. They are there all the time when kids are logging in from home or whatever other method you are following in your own country. So you all are leaders in this classroom. So it is very essential that leaders stay calm and motivating. So leaders need to be prepared. We don't need to panic. And we have resources, and we just need to regather and see what those best resources that we have. And there will be bumps on the road, and there will be some glitches. Things happens for the region, right? And many of us know that dealing with economy is not easy in this current environment, and no one had ever imagined this will have even happen. No one is even prepared for it. So we are dealing with a government who is on your side or who may not be on your side. Lots of countries, private schools are struggling, and you are worried about whether you can collect enough fee and revenue to keep your teachers on payroll and provide the school or keep the schools open. So there are lots of these challenges the administrator and leaders in education sectors are facing right now. So what we did was we collected expectations from you that has been shared with all our faculties, and they are aware of your expectations. So hopefully by the 5th day, we will be able to answer most of your expectations and meet your expectations or go beyond the expectations. And without further delay, I just want to introduce our moderator for today. Then I'm going to disappear. I'm going to put on myself on mute and listening to you. And then you are with moderator and your presenter. So our moderator for today is going to be Dr. Arun Joshi. And I'm trying to find where Dr. Joshi is. Somewhere here, because we have lots of people. So I need to now go through this.
I'm here, Suman.
Spotlight, yeah. So this is something new we're getting used to. So Dr. Arun Joshi is founder of Leadership Academy Nepal, LAN, and Senior Research Fellow at Institute for Integrated Development Studies, also known as IIDS in Kathmandu, Nepal. He's also an adjunct faculty professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He worked at the World Bank, Washington, D.C. for over 2 decades. And he's also a senior consultant at IDI, as I told you in the beginning. He is one of the brain behind this program. His experience spans education policy reform and program development in diverse range of countries in the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. He has a master's degree in international education policy and doctorate in human development from Harvard University in USA. And I just want to recognize, like most of our faculties have joined in today. And I want to thank them because they had to wake up very early or stay late. Having said that, Dr. Joshi, it's all yours.
Thank you, Suman. Welcome, everybody. Again, good evening to those of you in the East, and good morning to some of us in the West. Great to have you online like this, and we are looking forward to a great session both today and hopefully it will be for the next 5 days. And as Suman said, we hope to try to meet your expectations, although this is certainly a very complicated topic in a very complicated and uncertain environment. So we'll all have to participate in this process of discussion and knowledge sharing and knowledge creation. I am the moderator, which means I'm just going to introduce Professor Gopinathan, and then when the time for the question answer comes up during the session, I would prefer that you send your questions via chat because that becomes very easy, and I will consolidate them and convey those to Professor Gopi so that it's easy for him to then respond back to those questions. I think otherwise it'll just be too unwieldy. So I would prefer, as I said, to have those questions on chat, and I'll be writing them down and then consolidating them. Some of them might repeat themselves. So, you know, you sort of say this cluster of questions, and then he can respond to those. I think those are just prior to introducing him. He's going to take a very broad overview of the whole terrain because this is the context setting today. And he's going to take, we're very pleased, first of all, that we will have him and then also 2 other colleagues from Singapore. Singapore is always considered to be a great example of success in education. And so it is always important to go back to Singapore and learn from the experience. And that I hope is what Dr. Gopi, Professor Gopi, and our other 2 faculties will provide us. There will be opportunities to ask questions because each context is different, of course. You know, I mean, Nepalese will say, oh, but it's different in Nepal, and Philippines colleagues will say, oh, it's different in the Philippines, and that's perfectly fine. And context will nuance our ability to respond in different contexts. So that's fine. But we look forward to hearing those experiences from Singapore in terms of how they are responding to some of these issues. There will be pauses. I think those are the times when the questions are going to be questions and answers. I think in his particular case today, slides 10, after slides 10 and slides 20, we will have pause to ask questions. And I will ask Professor Gopi to actually drive that and then alert us. And then after that, I will just be taking the questions and then giving it back to him, consolidating it and giving it back to him. So that's basically the approach we will use. We suggest very much, just so that everybody feels that they are together, that if possible, unless you have to run off somewhere, keep your videos on, but your mics off, so that there's no background noise disturbance, and we also get to see your faces, just so that it's fun to be together, Otherwise, we just don't know who is there and whether you're there or not. But if you have to leave and there's something going on in the background, then you can shut it off, no problem. That's how I would suggest we proceed. So Professor Gopinathan, we are really, honored to have him. He's one of the major figures in education in Singapore, and we are really privileged and honored to have him as one of our faculty. I will read so that I don't forget anything major now, his background, and introduce him. Professor Gopinathan has been extensively involved in Singapore's education policy and practice planning for over 4 decades. He's a leading contributor to teacher education in Singapore and the region. He served as the Dean of the School of Education, National Institute of Education in Singapore from 1994 to 2000. He presently serves as academic advisor to the HEAD Foundation. HEAD Foundation, as you know, is one of the also sponsors of this program. In 2003, he helped NIE establish a Center for Research and Pedagogy and Practice. He has served on numerous Ministry of Education review committees, including the Thinking Schools, Learning Nation, and Junior College Upper Secondary Review Committee. Professor Gopinathan was also involved in setting up the Singapore Center for Teaching Thinking, the Principals Executive Center, and is also a founder member of the Educational Research Association of Singapore. He has also served as a consultant for the World Bank, UNESCO, the Asian Development Bank, and the Commonwealth of Learning. In 2000, he was awarded the Distinguished Alumnus Award by the State University of New York, Buffalo. And in 2001, the Singapore Government's Public Administration Medal for services to education. So we're very fortunate. Professor Gopi, I leave the floor to you now.
You can just speak.
Okay. Thank you, Arun, and for that introduction, which I wrote. And welcome everybody to this week-long seminar. We have, anyway, okay. We have a week of thinking about the context that we are in. It's a challenging context, and we hope that you will find some of our insights, some of our experiences, some of our answers, particularly in the Singapore context, useful to you as you think about it in your own context. There is no cut and paste solution to many education problems because they are all very complex. And perhaps nothing is more complex than this environment that we face now. It used to be said that we are forever in a sort of crisis mode. but a lot of consensus around COVID-19 seems to suggest that we don't even know everything we need to know about COVID-19, about the virus, and whether or not there's likely to be a second wave or a third wave. So a huge amount of uncertainty is upon us as educators. And yet, in some ways, we have a sacred responsibility because we have to respond on behalf of parents, on behalf of the system, especially on behalf of the children. So it is both a challenge and an opportunity. And we very much hope as organizers that you'll find what we have to say very useful.
You want to share?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the program basically plans to address hopefully all, if not some of these questions. How has and will COVID-19 change the world and the world of education? Remember, in many ways, we are still in the beginning stage. So whatever we are suggesting could or would not perhaps be relevant 1 year down the line. There's a big debate, for example, going on in America as to whether the schools should reopen. And there are many different voices about whether the schools reopen and how they can reopen successfully. I don't know the context in Nepal or the context in the Philippines at this point in time, but what is the issue with regard to school closures, school reopening, and how policymakers, educators, school principals, school leaders, and parents should respond to this. So one is this element of uncertainty, this element of opportunity, and this obligation that we have as educators to try and respond as well as we can to this. So what changes will be required? You have heard the phrase new normal. What does new normal actually look like in Nepal? What does it look like in the Philippines? What does it look like in Singapore? Some similarities with regard to vision or goals, not much change. The vision of education is central and remains, but in the context of which decision-making with regards to new goals or decision-making with regard to which strategies are most appropriate and cost-effective will be different. So we ask you to take some of the Singapore experience on board, but also realize that contextually it can be difficult. Key message, what must schools do to strengthen learning? We already live in an environment of inequality in terms of educational access. That is, in fact, according to UNESCO, already a learning crisis because many children who need to be in good schools and appropriate schools for their learning are not in school. And now we have this new phenomenon of school closures of children who are already enrolled. But learning is our mission in education. So how do we respond to this opportunity to strengthen learning? And you can't have learning without teaching to some extent. So how can teacher autonomy and teacher professionalism be strengthened? And now we also have a hybrid model that is emergent, which is the role of parents and home-based learning coming into the picture. How is that to be understood? How is that appropriate in the various contexts? It won't be one model of a hybrid system. It could be many different models, even within the same country. So a lot of answers that we have some insight into that is going to be needed, but we also have to live in a certain degree of uncertainty and open to learning and open to opportunities elsewhere. So with regard to my particular agenda, it is largely broad-based, as Arun pointed out, because I want to set in context something that we have learned in Singapore, and I'll justify why this emphasis on Singapore and not broadly comparative or looking at Vietnam or looking at Thailand or looking at South Korea. Because I think Singapore has some experience in dealing with crises, with fundamental changes in education, and some of that may be appropriate to you. So I'll look at the setting at the present time, the educational consequences of the pandemic, the challenges it poses to policymakers and school leaders, schooling strategies, teachers and students, and technology. I won't say very much about technology. I'll touch a little bit on what Singapore has done because my two colleagues from Singapore will have a lot more to say. So one of the things is really mission. The vision of the school, it seems to me, even in these very changed times, will remain, some fundamentals will remain. Meeting students' social, emotional, and learning needs will remain a key element of any school vision. In fact, even though we've had a school system that always has this underpinning it, in many ways we have tended to focus on learning, on cognitive development, on how much mastery of the curriculum there has been. And it may be that we need to, in this particular point in time, when there is a degree of uncertainty, there is a degree of anxiety, not just among students, but among students and teachers and parents and policymakers, to try and remember that socio-emotional development, holistic development of the child throughout the K-12 system is going to be important. Goals. The goals can be different and will have to be different within a given context. And it will depend to some extent on systemic features, on individual schools, schools within a particular area, public, private, urban, rural. So again, not a cookie cutter answer to this problem. How do what we have to share be appropriate, be modified for your context? And finally, strategies. And there's a whole array of strategies that have been tried out, not just in Singapore at the present time, but also in many, many different places in the world. And I'm sure in the Philippines and in Nepal, these two would be dominant. Quickly about Singapore, and one might ask why Singapore, and I'll give you a quick answer. Singapore has a lot of experience with crises. We are a small island, very little resources, in an area surrounded by large neighbors, and we had to try and figure out a way in which we would be a viable nation. We thought we were too small to be independent, so there was a merger arrangement between Malaya at that time and Singapore in 1963, but it did not work. And in 1965, on August the 8th, we woke up to find that we were independent. Paradoxically, it was an independence we did not want, but it was an independence that we had to make it work for us. So one of the things that you will need to understand about Singapore is that it has worked and faced many crises, not just in education, but in the establishment of itself as a country. And in some ways, it has been a very successful example of a country with its backs to a wall, trying to build a viable nation. Today, Singapore's per capita GDP is in excess of 60,000 US dollars. It's been a huge transformation over the last century when we were basically empty of pocket. Today, it is a very successful nation. What is the core ingredient? What is the secret sauce that made this possible? That we recognize our limitations. We did not have natural resources. We did not have arable land. We couldn't feed ourselves because we couldn't be farmers or anything like that. We could only survive if we educated, if we developed the human talent that we have. So education was central to the success of Singapore in the way it has built up the nation, in the way in which it is a model for developing countries. So you will understand when I say that education is central to our success. Education has the top leaders, potential prime ministers have been education ministers. And education has always had a substantial part of the national budget. So education has been important. And in a system that if you start at 1965, by about 2009, we had entered into PISA. And in 2009, we were second in maths. And in 2015, we were top in PISA. And in 2018, we were second in PISA to China. So that is the progress that has been made from a system that was actually not a unified system, because during colonial era, with English medium schools, Chinese medium schools, Malay medium schools, and Tamil medium schools, a segregated medium of instruction, a diversified system. But today, we have a unified system. So that is the educational journey, the reason why education is so highly regarded, so well-funded, so well-led, and we have a very activist Ministry of Education. This is very quickly phases of educational development. I won't spend too much time on it, except that we call ourselves a survival phase. This was really building up the school system, unifying the school system. We discovered that our policies of language of instruction were hugely problematic. So we called it an efficiency phase, because we had to build differentiation within a national system of education. A common curriculum, but not necessarily a common mode of learning and teaching. I can't seem to, oh, this one. No? No. So this is the system. These are the pathways in the system. Quick look at what are the common features. It's a high-performing public system. Every child of a Singaporean citizen has got to go to the public school. The private school is not accessible. There are private schools in Singapore, but it is a fully funded public school system. Secondly, it's a tracked system. There is a common curriculum, common assessment, the teachers all qualified with the same qualifications, but within the school system itself, that is tracking in order to address this perennial problem. How do you have commonality and differentiation? How do we enable children of different talents, different abilities, different readiness for learning to be able to read it, right? Paradoxically, education is not compulsory throughout K to 12. It is compulsory only at the primary level. But almost every one of the primary one cohort finishes year 10 and does well. And a substantial percentage goes on to year 11 and year 12. So in excess of almost 95% of the entry cohort at grade 1 completes grade 10. And it's a rigorous exam and a rigorous curriculum. Where is this stuck here? All this. This, okay, so this is the base shifted, right?
Yeah, you should be.
This one, okay. This is basically an attempt to try and capture some of the vision, some of the goals of the system, both at the individual school level and at the system level. I'll go on to now a final slide, which is basically the recent reforms we have had. Singapore realized that it built from 1965 onwards till about 1995, an industrial model system, a common curriculum, a focus on examinations. But we realized that globalization was going to pose a major challenge, because we wanted students to graduate, not just having been content heavy or content mastery, but also entrepreneurial, also innovative, also risk takers. And we realized that we needed a different type of pedagogy, not a teacher-dominated, examination-dominated pedagogy, but a pedagogy that will make learning useful, applied learning. So you have applied learning program. And a suggestion that examinations, learning, practicing knowledge, and the knowledge does not end when you finish year 6 or year 10, but learning goes on for life. The old term was lifelong learning, if you remember. So these are the ways in which the Ministry of Education supports the schools in making the shifts. So promoting applied learning, promoting lifelong learning, and promoting joy of learning. And the joy of learning, I think, is very interesting, because ours is a very competitive system. So students very often study because they have to pass the exams and move on to the next level. And that we realize is not going to be something that you can depend on in the future. So how would again, within a national system, within a common curriculum, create opportunities for children to specialize in different areas? And so this is a sort of educational journey that Singapore undertook. Huh? And this is just the results with regard for PISA, and I won't go through it. Many of you will know that Singapore, as I said, did well. This is the latest PISA results for reading, mathematics, and science. And you'll see that Singapore is second in all of that. When we say China, it's not just the whole of China. It's largely Macau, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. And that's where I think and note also that Korea is within the top 10. Okay, we move on to the second phase, and we'll take a pause here. I wanted to know, both for myself and for those presenters who will follow, what you would regard as the most present challenge, the most important challenge you face as a school leader.
Do you want them to unmute and talk, or?
Well, it can go through you, or it can come straight to me. We won't have time for many questions. We'll have only time for perhaps two questions, two answers, one from perhaps Nepal, the other from the Philippines.
I think in this case, it might be better if people just speak up, because there are just few questions, and then just ask your questions instead of having to ask in chat, just to clarify for you. Okay. Later on, when we have the question answer session, whatever minutes we have left, at that time, you will be all thinking about questions to ask. I think this is just for this period, so I think you might want to do it. Go ahead, please. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm here from Nepal.
Yeah.
And I'm head teacher of the remote hills of Nepal, and my students are not in access of internet access. And we are trying to provide some homework that they could do at home. But even that correction and other things are difficult, and attendance of the students for correction of the homework is not regular. And in this situation, we are also thinking to call them in our classroom in fixed difference of periods and fixed difference of time. But we are not sure either there will be safe or not, so that it is quite troublesome where our students are not in access with internet access, and yeah, we are facing this problem.
It's not a unique problem. It's not a different problem from what Singapore faced. I said that Singapore, in comparison to the Philippines and Nepal, is a resource-rich country in terms of financial resources. And in fact, the government actually has a plan to try and build Singapore up into a smart nation. And I will refer later to the ICT master plans that we have had to try and equip every school, every child with the ability. But you know what happened during COVID? We discovered that when we were launching home-based learning, that there was a certain percentage of low-income households where, even though they might have had a phone, they didn't have a smartphone, they didn't have internet access. So if you can imagine that in a country like Singapore, which, as I said, is very wealthy, well developed, we also have these differentials. Your problem may be greater, I admit. Ours may be a smaller number. And you will see later that the Singapore government responded to this. But it is going to be a big issue and a problem in many countries. Because if you cannot go to school because of the limitations of safe distancing or hygienic factors and all the rest of it, then you have to rely on some form of e-learning, some form of remote learning. But that means a technology element comes in, and very, very few systems are prepared. Even in America, the richest country in the world, there's a sizable number of students and low-income families who do not have this access. So this is going to be one of the challenges of the future, And it's not much that it seems to me that principals can do, school leaders can do. This is going to be a national Ministry of Education effort to try and build up that capacity for the future. But
Thank you.
my other presenters will
Good
come back
evening.
to that in greater detail.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening,
I
sir.
have
Professor Gopinathan, sir, may I ask just to share my experience here in Nepal during the challenges during this COVID-19 situation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As world, uh, as everywhere in the world, our schools are closed down due to COVID-19 now. And this time we are facing most of our government schools are quarantined and physical classrooms are closed.
It's
We
breaking
have
up.
ICT because they have. Am I right?
Suman, I can't hear. It's breaking up.
So then can I go? Go ahead. If
Try again.
Sumanji is breaking up, hello, my name is Bhushan Gurung.
Yeah.
Mr. Gopinathan, you just mentioned about Singapore's education system, where you said that though you have private and public schools, but it is the public school which is the core of Singapore's education.
Yeah.
But how does private school fare in terms of support from the government and in terms of students' participation in Singapore?
The private schools are not supported by the government. They are private enterprises for profit.
Is it purely private? Or
Purely private. There are some schools where you can admit some private students, but they must be balanced off by a certain percentage of Singaporean students.
Okay. No,
But there are very few of them.
Doesn't the government support private schools in terms of training and in terms of sharing the pedagogic systems?
No.
Means private schools function purely on their own instinct and system in Singapore?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, shall we then move on to because time is
there are a few there are a few questions, Professor Gopi, that has come on the chat, but maybe
towards
you
the
can
end,
move on and then we can take it later on. I will be jotting them down and we can take them later on.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you have questions, do write them and I'll be jotting them down, and because we don't want to lose train of the actual presentation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. You all know about COVID, so I don't have to go in greater detail with regard to COVID. But in some ways, I mean, COVID has created the deepest recession in peacetime history. And we really don't know yet the scale of the disruption that is caused by COVID, right? Singapore's Prime Minister called it the challenge of a generation. And that we don't know, even in super efficient and pragmatic Singapore, we don't know what the nature of the challenges are going to be, how the economy is going to be impacted, how unemployment, job loss is going to be considerable. Even our health systems, how they are going to deal with it. So it is, we know sort of mentally that these are different times, but I think the term new normal doesn't capture the magnitude and the depth of the disruption that is being caused. And one of the fundamentals I take away from reading about this is going to be that there's going to be a national economic decline as well as global economic decline. And that means the resources that are needed to rebuild the economy, to fund those who are unemployed, if you want to create new school buildings, new designs for school buildings, all that is going to cost money. And it is coming at a time when national income, national economic growth, is declining and will decline, and we don't really know. Singapore's taken a big hit because Singapore's economy is not just dependent on itself. It is an international hub for finance, for business, for trade, for shipping, for aviation. We are interconnected with the world. And if the world economy is going to be under strain, then we are terribly impacted, right? So I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that COVID is going to really challenge us in many different ways. Collapsed businesses, huge unemployment losses, even in labor short Singapore, the small and medium-sized industries are going to the wall. There's going to be personal and national debts. There's going to be a mortgage that people cannot pay. Rising inequalities. No country is completely equal. The degrees of inequality may be different, but they exist. This phenomenon of the pandemic is going to make it worse. Social divisions, as we see in America, will create problems, as in many other countries. Environmental degradation. So it's a crisis that is not just purely medical or health-wise, but it is a crisis that is creating ripples, if you like, tsunamis in other parts of the world. And one of the things that has also come to the fore is, as I said earlier, as somebody pointed out, is the greater roles of ICT, whether it is Zoom or Facebook or MOOCs or Google Classroom, the Khan Academy, and many other different types of technological answers. It would seem that in this crisis of deprivation, it is the shares of the big ICT companies that are really benefiting from this. So ICT in education and in the ways that which we are communicating is going to be very big, and that's going to be a new phenomenon. So what are the challenges for policymakers in this environment? Winston Churchill is supposed to be the author of this famous phrase, never waste a good crisis. It's both a challenge and an opportunity. It's an opportunity, perhaps, to reimagine schooling. What is it that in building up what we are familiar with in education, what is it that we now have a chance to change? It might be that if I was speaking for Singapore, I would say ours is a highly competitive, exam-oriented system. And well, our students do very well in terms of their exam scores at year 10 or year 12 or as university undergraduates. There's hardly any attrition in our universities. Students who get admitted to the universities graduate from the universities. But it's a particular type of system. What does this break, school closures, involvement of families, what does this portend for a future model of education that pays attention to community, that pays attention to the socio-emotional needs of children, children particularly who are deprived, who come from low-income homes? How can we be inclusive? And how can we meet the learning needs, the socio-emotional, the developmental needs of every child? That should be our target. And it may be an opportunity to say, what is it that the present system lacks? But you know, one of the big challenges is going to be, where's the resources going to come from? If you have a classroom of 30, 40 students, no social distancing is possible. Social distancing is only going to be possible if you cut that down to maybe 15 students. Where do the other students go to? How do you build for that sort of, how do you redesign classrooms if COVID is going to be with us for some time to come? How do you teach young children not to get too close to each other, not to play to each other? There's a whole set of things that children are used to doing, and we think it's normal for young children. This sense of building an identity, of having friends, of missing friends, of learning with friends, of in the cafeteria with friends. How are we going to recreate some of that in entirely new environments without the resources? The physical reorganization and design of classrooms, for teacher capacity building, for technology, for utilization. This is going to be a big demand on the national budget and on the budgets of the ministries of education. Some of the education consequences: as of June 2020, 1.6 billion children have had their education interrupted due to school closures. 1.6 billion. And this doesn't take into account those children who are never in school for a variety of reasons. 86% of children in low-income countries are effectively out of school, compared with only 20% of high-income countries. This means that not all children have the sort of access to quality education that we all as educators think desirable. And learning loss because of school closures, there will be a loss in terms of what they have not remembered, what they have not built upon because of school closures. All this is going to mean generations of children who would, in some way or the other, complete 6 years or 10 years of education, but would not have mastered the sort of curriculum range that we think desirable. And that is an education consequence that policymakers and school principals and teachers and parents will have to deal with. Individual schools, many of you are principals of individual schools, disruption of learning. What does that actually mean? Is it the same for every child? Is it the same for a child in a private school or in a public school? What is the disruption in learning? And when schools reopen, how do we ensure and to what extent can we catch up with what has been lost? If you take a curriculum, what do you drop in the curriculum? What would you consider not to be as important as it was previously? These are decisions that have to be made at the school level, at the ministry level. In fact, I don't know whether you can see this, but this was something that came up in today's newspaper, which is, what do you do with assessment? What do you do with exams that lead from elementary to high school, from high school to post-high school? What sort of assessment will be seen as fair? What sort of assessment will be seen as appropriate? These are all very big decisions. And one of the points I want to make here is that this cannot all be done at the level of the individual school. There is a system-wide response that is also required. Otherwise, you will have individual schools making decisions in individual ways. You know, school leaders, sometimes we can regard ourselves as being super persons, but you cannot work, it seems to me, without a policy environment, without a policy ecology that supports the changes you are trying to make in school. So the school leader, in my view, has to have the support of the policymaker as much as he needs to have the support of parents, of teachers, and of pupils themselves. So I think the impact on students' socio-emotional and cognitive development will be very large. You know, you would think that everybody would be eager to go to school, but there are children who reluctantly went to school in the first instance. Now this break away from school of 4 weeks or 8 weeks is going to mean some of them will be reluctant to go back to school. Not all, but some of them will be. How do we bring them back in and integrate them? Because their learning is also important. We are going to have the emergence of not a hybrid model, I would say multiple hybrid models. What mixture of home-based schooling and e-learning is going to be appropriate in a particular school, in a particular context, especially as in an area with low resources, with a large number of low-income families. A new phenomenon is going to be parents as collaborators. You know that we very often think when the schools, when the children come to school, the school is responsible for the learning. Today we are in a hybrid model, we are saying that the parents are also responsible. But what does that mean in practice? If the children do well, everybody is happy. If the children don't do well, who's accountable for poor performance? And are you going to have not parents and teachers working together, but parents and teachers in potential conflict? Because one group says, you are responsible, you should have attended to this. And the other group says, no, you're the school, you should be responsible for this. And of course, increased use of technology. So there are individual level consequences which school leaders have to meet, but they cannot meet it seems to me, on their own. Some answers will be individual because the school has the capacity. Some answers have to be shared. So collaboration, not only between teachers in a school, but between schools is going to be important. And I hope that private-public collaboration will also take place because there are different resources, there are different competencies, but it's a big challenge which cannot be, it seems to me, solved at the level of the individual school alone. It has to have wider support and a collaborative ecology of support and performance is going to be important. So what sort of school leaders are likely to do well in this context? I would say that understands what changes are needed and what this implies for their relationships with teachers, parents, and students. Many school leaders all over the world, in order to do and deal with the daily routines, routinize what they do. Some are more activists, some walk the corridors, some stay in their office, some depend on their vice principals, some depend on their established routines. But I think every school leader needs to ask, for my particular school, what are the issues that confront our school? What are the goals of the school in this context? It is easy enough to say, well, you know, school curriculum recovery, learning recovery. But what does that mean? So it seems the ability to develop an explicit school improvement agenda to make up for the learning loss is going to be important. And this will inevitably require the cooperation, the work, the collaboration of teachers in a school, but hopefully also teachers within a community of schools, within an area. And so the principal has to have the knowledge, the skills, the dispositions in collaboration with teachers to set new appropriate learning vision and goals. That is going to be, in my view, the first task when schools reopen. Given uncertainty, how do you develop your plans? With flexibility, because you will need to be changing. Because as I said, we don't know 6 months from now, 1 year from now, whether COVID is still with us, what the consequences of COVID are. And this uncertainty means that planning with a certain final end goal in mind is going to be difficult. So a degree of flexibility is important, but you can't also chop and change too much, because then people will not know, parents will not know, teachers will not know. Every 3 months, what are we going to change? What is it that we did 3 months previously that didn't work? So how do you build plans with flexibility? How do you win the support of parents? How do you win the support of teachers in order to be able to change when appropriate? To the extent that principals can be instructional leaders, they will need to support and mentor teachers in efforts to change pedagogy, especially in the use of technology. Building a collegial sharing culture among teachers. Some of you already do it. Most of you already do it. But I think the new times are going to call for much greater efforts. Because don't forget, it's not just parents and children are going to be traumatized by the disruption. Teachers also. And in some systems, there won't be money to pay teachers. There won't be money for increments. Some teachers will let go. We will let go. And that too is an uncertainty that teachers will face. And I think in order to confront these huge challenges, you must be able to buy support or build support with key stakeholders, which is parents and governments, teachers unions, public sector companies, private sector companies. You have to be able to get the resources you need if it is not available from the main source, which is normally the Ministry of Education. And that's not necessarily skills you automatically have, but it is something, it seems to me, that you need to build. I won't talk too much about it because I think this is just basically how do you build capacity within your teachers to cope with the new pedagogical environments that exist. Schooling strategies, what will be needed? first and foremost, in my view, parents and children are assured that the school is a safe place to go to. As I said, the big debate is happening in America on whether or not it is possible to build a safe school in this particular environment, what procedures will be needed. Because reopening schools and having children in there, and if you get a spike, if you get an infection, then it spreads out to other children, spreads out to parents, spreads out to parents, to teachers as well. So how do you decide on when it is appropriate and under what conditions and procedures schools? Even the school bus driver can be a source of infection. The person who operates the canteen can be a source of infection. How under these conditions are we going to do it? Decide what instructional plans are appropriate for making up for learning loss. We talked about an instructional plan later on, earlier. So how, what, again, it will not be the same for all schools. It will not be the same at all levels, but these plans will have to be there and the teachers must be able to buy into those plans and be able to execute it. And principals and teachers to initiate and support emergent hybrid models of schooling, online learning and home-based schooling. So this will make a big demand on teachers who, as I've said earlier, have routinized their practice. This is what they do. This is my lesson plan. I go into the classroom. This is the textbook chapter we will cover. This is the way we will teach. Now, all that will have to change. And teachers are all creatures of habit like we all are, right? That's the way we survive that. Different classes we teach and all the rest of it. So change is going to be difficult, not just for students, but also for teachers. What can we do to support them? Ensure counseling is available to students who are anxious and distracted. The younger the child, the greater the chance that they are going to be anxious and distracted, because they too have their routines disrupted. Which child likes to have a face mask put on for 4 hours or 5 hours while they sit in school? Which child doesn't want to play with their friends? And you're saying, no, 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 don't go near them. No, no, you can't touch them. How do you create that whole environment of the school they are familiar with? So that disruption is going to have consequences for them. What do you do with lab work? What do you do with field work? What do you do with extracurricular activities? Which sports will you allow and which sports won't you allow and why? This is going to be a big challenge. How to build processes and how to win the confidence, again, of teachers, of children, and of parents. So I think help and support of teachers is going to be very, very important. And finally, in terms of curriculum, decide what is to be retained in the curriculum and how learning is to be assessed, particularly those children who are in critical major exams. What 3-4 months have been lost. How do you basically ensure that the exam is a reasonable exam, not based on what was intended to be covered, but what was actually covered? This you cannot do on an individual school by school basis. This will have to be a policy decision at the highest level as to what elements in the curriculum will need to be treated in particular ways. Pay attention to mental health issues. We talked a little bit earlier about the disruption, the anxiety, the refusal to go back to school. Do schools have trained counselors who can identify and spot children who are in difficulty, who are stressed? Reach out to parents. Parents are not natural teachers, or they are teachers in a different sort of way. They may not be able to do what teachers do so fluently. How are they to be supported? Okay, we take a break here. Cooperation, I talked about a little bit about community. So even though you may have private schools and public schools or somewhere in between, how can we build cooperation? How can we build sharing among schools, among teachers? It's a lot of technological aids, but you might want to think and provide some examples that you are aware of that is already happening in your school district in either Nepal or in the Philippines?
One of the things, Professor Gopi, and for the wider audience as well, I saw some questions coming in, and I've been clustering them. Something that is very important. I think some of the questions are understandable. They relate to devices and, what do we do in Nepal? Well, I mean, things are not going to be comparable to Singapore, all of that. There is a rush to questions. And my suggestion to the overall team, the students here, is that let's not rush to ask the questions as if as if there are some real silver bullets that immediately Professor Gopi or others of us might have answers to. There are no silver bullets here. It's a question of trying to really, I would urge you to listen more carefully to what Professor Gopi is actually presenting, to understand how Singapore is dealing with it. It's also dealing with the same crisis that Nepalese are dealing with, that Americans are dealing with, that Filipinos are dealing with. So clearly there will be issues there that are common, and there will then be also issues where, Singapore has X resources and X kinds of better support systems and all, and we don't have that, therefore we need to deal with that. But only after listening to him with a kind of a deep listening, will you be able to come up with the genuine questions that we really need to ask, and how do we then try to answer those going forward as schools and as a nation eventually. As Professor Gopi said, schools might not have all the ability to answer all the questions and drive change. So all I'm saying is, let's not rush to ask, how do we even do this? I saw one question about, how do we compare Singapore education system with Nepal? Very true, we cannot, but one of the comparison aspects right now is that they're dealing with the same COVID crisis. The virus doesn't affect Singaporeans differently than it affects everybody else. It affects everybody similarly. So we are in the same situation with respect to the virus. Now, if Singapore is dealing with it in a certain way, let's learn first how Singapore is dealing with this situation. And from there, we might be able to derive some elements that might be applicable in our own countries. And in some cases, they won't be applicable. And at that point, I think the questions should arise. Well, this is not applicable. Now, how do we deal with this? Because we are different from Singapore in X, Y, and Z ways. So there's just a request to you all, because I saw a lot of questions driving in, and that sort of distracts you from the actual learning process. I'm just this is just my suggestion to you. Obviously, many of the questions are very, very pertinent and relevant. So I'm not saying that the questions are not relevant. I'm just saying, let's listen to what the presentation is, and then come up with questions. But I do have a cluster of questions here, but I think that we will go towards the end. Yeah. Right now, again, let's open it up for any any suggestions on the prompt that Professor has just asked about collaboration between the public-private.
Anyone?
Can I speak?
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Recently, our government here in Nepal did announce about the Ministry of Education, or Education Minister himself had talked about public and private partnership. In Nepal, it's nearly the same structure that we have public schools or the government aided schools, and we also have private schools.
Hmm.
And the in terms of numbers and quantity, government schools or public schools far outweigh the private schools. But in terms of educational services, it looks as if the private schools do have a certain edge, and it is a very good idea in terms of collaboration between private and public schools. I think the most important aspect in terms of collaboration is there should be a bridge so that a rapport is built between the private stakeholders as well as the government stakeholders. What I see today in Nepal is there is a bit of a gap between the private schools and the public schools.
Yep.
So if there can be a person who can bridge the gap and bring these two educational, I should say, entities in Nepal closer to each other, then there are a lot of chances of private and public collaboration to go ahead.
Can I just respond to that? One of the things that Singapore did, even though it does not have this private public divide that you might have either in the Philippines or in Nepal, is that the Singapore schools are clustered into, well, the island is divided into zones. There are 4 zones, and within the zones, there are a number of schools that form a cluster, right? And that is a way of giving them a degree of autonomy from the ministry, but it's also a way of institutionalizing sharing, because the cluster of 12 to 14 primary and secondary schools is headed by a superintendent who's a very experienced principal, right? So that facilitates to some extent, if that school has a very innovative maths teacher, that should not remain only within that school. And it may be that that school, that example of effective maths teaching can be made available to that cluster, right? So it is a way in which sharing as part and parcel of a national system is actualized in Singapore. And I think it's worked very well for us, because you can have all your portals, but there's nothing like saying, hey, come over to my school and have a look at how this English teacher is teaching, or how the science teacher is teaching. So that's one example, that schools within a region can form a cluster, either through an initiative of the Ministry of Education, or through principals saying, hey, let's meet once a month, or let's meet once in 2 months and share what we are doing, because these are not normal times, right? We are not in competition, we are trying to survive. So that's important. The second idea, of course, is that you all know that in many systems, ministries create portals where lesson plans and innovative examples are put up. There's no reason why school leaders cannot do this and share. It can be an informal community of leaders. It could be a learning community. You could organize a webinar like this to share. You could do short video clips and put up on a website. So technology can facilitate this notion of collaboration, this notion of we are all in this together, private or public, primary or secondary. We all have experiences, we all have challenges, but some of us have found some answers which are appropriate in Nepal, which are appropriate in the Philippines. So if you don't have that sort of a network, my recommendation would be that this is an opportunity to build that you should not be, looking for market share, trying to get the best students, but saying we are all in this together. And therefore, if we share, we are going to come out of this stronger. So I think that is something that might be worth taking up with your Ministry of Education, or if there's a teachers union. There are many existing things which could be brought to bear on this problem of we cannot do this individually on our own. We need to be working together on behalf of the children.
Very true. Rightly said, sir. Rightly said.
And there's, I want to call on, I think there were people who raised their hands, and that might be a good way of doing it. So I've jotted down names, kindly colleagues. We need to be a little bit organized. So I'm going to call on Niladra Pariyal to talk first. And then we have also Lakshman Dattabhatta, who also raised his hand after that. If any of you others want to say something, just raise your hands and I'll go one by one.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Just wanted to share a particular example that our school, Trio, we're based out of Kathmandu, organized last year. This is not also during COVID. We understand that private partner and public partnership is important, and we tied up with the school in a remote village called Sangja, which is near a tourist destination called Pokhara, those who have been to Nepal. We do this under an umbrella project called the Connected Classrooms Project, where we develop a specific lesson plan and we give ourselves a month of teaching learning. We collaborate through Skype with teachers. We started this last year. And we try to develop a lesson plan, for example, plants around us. So the plants around Kathmandu would be very different from the remote village, which is about 300 kilometers away. And we take that as a biology, geography, history, culture lesson. And we collaborate online to talk about their experiences vis-a-vis ours. And these children from Sangja were children of farmers. They went to the farm in the morning and attended day school. And obviously we're not very privileged as our children. And when our teachers interacted with theirs, we had so much of practical learning. I'll just give you a small example. Our teachers learned, our children, having never seen farming tools in their lives, asked, how do you do agriculture? What is meant by agriculture? And that's a definition that they have learned in books. And these kids actually do agriculture for most of their lives along with their parents. So the kind of tremendous learning that our children and teachers had from them, vis-a-vis we teaching them technology and the resources that we could, was a fantastic start. And we have continued this practice, just to cite an example, that this can be done and this is happening. I also believe that the British Council also has a similar program, which we were not aware of earlier. It's called Connecting Classrooms Project. Our name sounded similar, but I just wanted to share this experience of ours. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. You should try and publicize this a lot more, so that will be an example for others also to say, well, we can learn from that. Because I think in this crisis, whether you're a rich country or a poor country, we all have to work together because the problems that confront us are huge. Okay. Is there one more question I can take before I want to conclude?
Okay, Lakshman Dattabhatta, please. Lakshman, please unmute.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good evening, Arun. Good evening, Prof. Gopinathan. Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Can you,
it's very difficult to hear.
Hello.
Very difficult to hear.
Maybe we can come back to question and answer time, and maybe we can sort this out.
I think we will do that. Please continue, Professor.
Yeah.
We will proceed, and then later on during the question and answer session, we will have more time for questions and answers. I've jotted down the names of people.
Okay. I just want to say a few words about technology and education in Singapore. I won't say very much because I think the other two Singapore presenters will have a lot more to say. But we did, actually, you will see from this timeline that I've given, from 1997, the Ministry of Education in Singapore has been investing very heavily in technology, right? And there's been at least now 4 master plans over a time frame from almost, what, 20 years, right? You would think that we would be very much up there, very well equipped, if you like, for dealing with the issues of technology and the utilization of technology in confronting educational problems. Future Schools was one of the initiatives, and the idea was basically to take a number of schools as pilot schools for ways in which they will be able to understand the power of technology, but also for the ministry and for the teachers and principals to understand what works and what doesn't work, what is appropriate for them, right? So it's the test bed of ICT policies and processes prior to scaling up the entire system. Student learning space is a portal that the ministry has, which is accessible by students and which has everything from lesson plans to answers to questions and all that. So it is a platform developed since 2018 to empower Singapore school students to drive their own learning according to their needs and interests. And there is a variety of interactive resources such as videos, animations, simulation, games. You know, this only needs to be done once, but made accessible to the whole education community. So technology is not simply a matter of lesson plans that are beamed into laptops at homes. Ministries of education or school clusters or foundations can help set up some measure of and archive some of these best practices so that others can access it. So the student learning space is an example, and the previous example that we have of an urban school and a rural school and students from those schools, again, that is a good case study of how collaboration can work in practice. So I won't say too much about it, but as I want to make the point that Singapore invested very early in technology, and most schools, if not all schools, are very well equipped. But I just want to point out that we discovered that we too had a digital divide. That a small number, but a significant number of students did not have access to the technology that will enable them to learn. So even if it developed Singapore in very systematic, planned environment, we too came up short. The scale of the challenge, of course, is not as great as yours, but I'm just making the point that we are all on a learning curve. Nobody has got all the answers. Nobody anticipates all the difficulties, right? But we can learn a lot more. We can shorten the response time if we share, if we are a community, if we collaborate, and if we hold fundamentally that our responsibilities are primarily to the students. And in these difficult times, we must do the best by them. I'll end up with one more slide. If you ask me, after 40 years of experience in the system, why we do so well, we're a small country, but we've had the same political party in power for almost 50 years. So while education ministers may change, there's a certain continuity in policy. And the policy is very pragmatic. What will work? What will meet our ministry's goals for education? It's not about private or public. It's not about inclusion or exclusion. It's not about tracking or non-tracking. What is appropriate in the Singapore context? And so this pragmatic policy making has been based, as they say in the US, based on data, based on science, what makes for the best learning environment. We had very high quality administrators who paid attention not just to policy development, but what does policy implementation look like? And how do we know that the intent of policy is being met, right? So a great deal of detailed attention, high and targeted levels of investment. Education is third in the national budget after defense and after health. But most importantly, from my point of view, we progressively raise standards for leadership and teacher development, teacher selection, teacher training, and incentives for outstanding teachers. So it's a cluster of policies that said, what will work for us? What do we know about how best to provide learning? what sort of resources are needed to make schools work, and crucially, what sort of leadership at the ministry level, at the school level, at the teacher level, and collaboration with parents is going to work for us. And I would say these are what I would have distilled from the way that I have seen and studied Singapore's education development. Thank you very much.
Singapore for education every year. Was it?
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
I think Lakshman Datta is asking question.
Yeah, we have some names, I think, of people who had asked questions, but I think...
Add one more question. Would you mind answering my question, sir?
So some of you are having difficulty connecting properly, so we're not hearing you very well.
No,
you might have...
sir.
Sorry?
Now, am I well?
No, we can't hear you very well. Can you, Professor Gopi, can you hear him very well?
Oh,
no, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
Now.
Excuse me, sir. Can I ask some question to Gopinathan?
That person is clear.
Yeah. Can I ask?
Identify yourself, please.
Yeah. I am Puna Dawadi.
Now it okay, sir? Now am I audible?
No, that's breaking up.
We can't hear you.
And I don't think we can, maybe he should turn off his video, and that will help sometimes.
Can I?
Now it okay, sir?
अब बोल्नुस् त एक बाजी हजुर
सुन्यो
त्यति राम्ररी सुन्एन हजुर अहिले अब यो यसो गरौँ न तपाईले यो लेखेर तपाईको क्वेशन लेखेर चाहिँ नि च्याटमा पठाउनुस् न प्लिज है
Can we have the Filipinos ask some questions, because you seem to be breaking down if it's coming from Nepal for the time. We'll come back to Nepal, but anybody from the Philippines? Can't hear you.
Unmute, kindly remember to unmute when you speak. Philippines colleagues. Okay, well, there is no question yet from Philippines. Can I ask Mr. Purna Prasad ji to go on, please?
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. I am from Nepal. I am Purna Prasad Dawadi, head teacher of Narayani Model Secondary School, Chittagong. What is the condition of educational system in Singapore of the school managing committee, or what is the role of the school management committee there? In Nepal, there is directly dominated to the head teacher of school management committee. What is the difference between Singapore and Nepal about the school management committee? Can I get the answer?
Yes, there is in every school a committee, but I would not say that they support the principal. They don't have any executive powers or anything like that. The principal is in charge of the school. Very often we think that there is a good relationship between them, and that's very often the case. But in my experience, and this was some time ago, the school management committees were largely there to help raise funds for the school. They would sponsor students and so on, and fairs for that sort of thing. The ministry is very clear that the responsibility for the school lies with the principal. And the principal is answerable in the public school system to the Ministry of Education. So the school advisory committees, as we call them, are there to basically support the school in line with the policies laid down by the ministry. Does that answer the question?
Okay, sir, clear.
Thank you. Philippines, where are you?
We do have, I think, hand raised by Domingo Lozande, please.
Domingo?
Or Joanna Puja.
Yes, sir. I'm not raising my hand. I'm just I want to react to Professor Gopi. What I like about what Professor Gopi says about the strong state, and Singapore basically has an alignment between policy and practice. So that makes the educational system, I think, to be more stronger. And that is what I admire about the Singaporean system.
Okay. Well, I agree. One of the advantages of small size, which we have exploited, is that there's one Ministry of Education. There's no federal Ministry of Education. It's the Ministry of Education, one teachers training college, and schools which are all aligned. And in fact, the ministry recruits the trainees for the Institute of Education to train as teachers, pays them fees, pays their fees and a stipend, in return for which, when they graduate, they go to school. So there's no loss between those who come to be trained as teachers but don't find jobs as teachers. If we need, in 3 years' time, 50 maths teachers, 50 maths teacher trainees are recruited and sent to the NIE for training. So there is the degree of alignment which we have exploited, which makes this a very effective system. Any others?
Yes, I think we had Sharmila Shrestha. Has she gone? And then I'll come back to another colleague from Philippines.
Okay, can I speak?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah, my question, I'm a primary teacher. I teach in grade 5.
Mm-hmm.
But what kind of problem I'm facing these days is, especially from the parents' side, you know, they are having a financial problem, like the mother is losing job and the father is losing job, and they are fighting in front of the kids. And the kid is not able to study well, and, you know, she doesn't want to come to the Zoom classes. And I don't know to whom to, you know, like console, or whom to handle first, the kid or the mother. The mother is not talking to the father, and father is not talking to the mother, and child sends me in a voice, you know, I'm not able to read and write because I have no books and copies. And those kind of children, how can we help? And another thing, as a teacher, just a teacher of class 5, the learning disability, the children who are slow learners, like even the parents are not able to handle them, and they are not in our hand. And in this situation, how the Singaporean teachers are handling that kind of situation. I hope they don't have this kind of situations, but most of the children in Nepal, you know, there are a lot of family problem, financial problem, internet problem.
I'm not the best person to answer this, but you'll probably need to ask this question of the two Singaporeans who are ex-principals. I've been a teacher trainer all my life, but not necessarily been spending a lot of time. But I'm sure that there are families in Singapore that face the same problem. It's not as if when you have a lockdown, it basically means people stay at home. So shops and food outlets and work is disrupted. Not everybody has the luxury of working from home. So this is a system that I think this is a scene, a problem that every system faces, and there must be different answers. If you have a school advisory committee, if you have access to counselors, these people will be able potentially to help. I don't know enough about the context to be able
I handed over the parents to the school counselor. But still, you know, day-to-day life, the child doesn't want to come for the classes and, you know, missing the classes.
This is very unfortunate, but I'm sure this is replicated in many schools, in many systems. It is something, it's a challenge, but as I said, the school alone cannot solve this problem because your school may be facing it, but there are other schools in the system, other families which are also having their routines disrupted, having their jobs disrupted. So my own view is that at a school level, there are some things that you are able to do and which you must do well. But there are other problems of a systemic nature that the individual school leader cannot meet. There's got to be a district office of education or a regional office of education or the Ministry of Education that is cognizant of it, that puts some resources into addressing this, that publicizes the problems that are there so that we can draw in the resources from other sources. Because ministries will say, sorry, we don't have the money to be able to fund these sort of initiatives. And yet the losers are the children. And that hopefully will be what will prompt us to say, no, we cannot let this continue. We've got to find a way. Is there any other school? Is there any other resource that we can draw on? That's all I can say. But as long as we have a heart for the children, as long as there are people who are prepared to say, I will try, even though I'm not a trained counselor, I will try and help. That's all we can do, because the longer the children are not learning, the greater the learning loss, the greater the difficulty of catching up. And that's one child lost. And I think it really is going to be, if at all you want a personal thing, that is the cost of what this disruption is about. That is the cost. A child's learning, a child's future, a child's opportunity lost. And sometimes we feel helpless. What are we to do as individuals? It's not that we can answer all these problems. Thank you for the question. Thank you.
Yes, and I think also when our other colleagues are delving more deeply into the school and classrooms and the teaching process, there might be other insights that our Singapore colleagues will provide to a question like that. I think today we're taking a broad sweep, very higher level view of the crisis and how we might respond. Mauricio, you had a hand up, and I'm going down the list, so don't worry, we'll get to those of you who have raised your hand.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So first, thank you so much for the opportunity that we are part of this particular webinar. In connection to Sir Domingo's reply, or should we say, comment on the situation in Singapore, that there is a coherence between political aspect and leadership, and there's an alignment in the policy and practice. And Professor Gopinathan made mention that the policy should be monitored and evaluate that it is being met. And here in the Philippines, we have policies that will guide teachers and curriculum implementers in different schools, considering the context of our country being archipelago.
Right.
Yeah. So we have different mechanisms on ensuring that the policy is being met. I'm just wondering, in Singapore experience, what are the mechanisms in place to monitor the policy that to ensure that it is being met.
Yeah. One of the fortunate advantages that Singapore has is that it is a small island, it's 350 square miles. The Minister of Education can be in any school in half an hour, right? So in a sense, there is not that distance, you know, that we will know immediately almost what is happening in a school that is not following the sort of routines. But apart from that, the Ministry of Education doesn't just basically say, this is the policy. One of the strengths of the ministry, as I said, is a very activist ministry. We have an examination board. We have a curriculum development board. We have at the Ministry of Education people who have come through the education system now to become administrators. We have an academy of principals, which is not the NIE, but a collection of principals who share, gather together, and build a community of practice. We have an academy of teachers. So there are mechanisms in place that enable the ministry through these various intermediary institutions to know what is happening. But the ministry itself undertakes reviews after major policies have been announced, enacted, to see what is happening, right? So the ministry is extremely well informed about what is happening at the school level, all right? And so that means that their response to emergent problems is going to be much quicker than most other systems, right? So the small size helps, but the culture of accountability, the culture of performance is very important in the Singapore civil service administration. So everybody is on their toes because, as I said, education is so important to us. Human capital development is so important to us. We just cannot let a policy that has been considered, that has been launched, and the ministry said, well, I don't know what happened to it. It's for the principal to decide how they're going to do it. That's not the Singapore way.
Can I have a follow-up question, Professor?
Yeah.
One more.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you made mention of the accountability of each leader in each school. So I'm just wondering if how do you cultivate this culture of accountability within the school leaders? Is there any should we say established principal induction program to really inculcate accountability on part of the principals in each schools?
Yeah, the principal knows. I mean, there are probably only about 350, 400 schools in the system. So it's not a huge number. It's not a huge, we have very large schools, you know, I mean, sometimes the number of students. So it's not a very large number, but as I said, why is Singapore so efficient in what it does, whether this is in health or in education or in transportation? Because of the culture of accountability that has been built up over the last 50 years by the political leadership, which then puts into place an administrative structure where people know what their tasks are. No, every teacher knows that he or she will be appraised at the end of the year. The principal or the vice principal sits down with every individual teacher in a school and says, this is what your performance was like last year. This is what we are planning to do this year. These are our expectations of you. You must be clear what it is that we expect. There is a midterm review and there's an end of year review. And if you are exceptional, you are rewarded for it. So it's a system that says, I give you professional autonomy. I expect you to be accountable for what you do and what you are tasked to do, what your KPIs are. And if you exceed those, we will reward you. So it's a clear, almost transactional, if you like. You know, I want you to do this, you do this, fine. You don't do this. Singapore has no problem saying if 2 strikes, 3 strikes, you don't perform, you're out. So that is the sort of, it's not just education, it's the whole of the civil service. Accountability is very high.
So it's embedded in within the political
built up over
system
the
and political system of the country.
I would say so. Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor.
And I would, I mean, I just wanted to mention very briefly only that I think certainly I can't speak for Philippines, but I know for Nepal, I think this might be one of the major differences, political, social difference between Singapore and the Nepalese context is how disjointed in many ways the personal and private initiatives of the school leaders and regions, maybe some regions of the countries that might be doing better than others, versus the federal level initiatives that are so disjointed, and that creates a lot of pressure for the education system. I mean, for example, this year, I mean, a lot of our colleagues here are private school colleagues, but I do know that in the public school system, which takes, as we mentioned earlier, most of the students in Nepal are going to public schools, and where resources are limited and technology is limited, there is a major issue with respect to this disconnect, because, for example, in the last 3 years, the government budget to education has declined and has been declining in the last 3 years to no more than 9% of the government budget.
Wow.
Now, I do remember looking at the Singapore and South Korea budget in the 70s. I think 1970s is where Singapore was, where Nepal is today. And you were spending in excess of 25% of your government budget on education. And here we are spending 9% of our government budget on education. And how are we to tackle this issue? Clearly, there are these kinds of issues, and we can talk more about it. We do have 5 days, and there will be other issues and other topics that, as we discuss, these things will come up. We do have a question, Professor, from Lakshman, who asked, you nicely put that context of the government and the system all being in alignment. But I think his question is more about what is the role of the principals and the teachers in setting policies, if I understand this correctly, in setting policies on recruitment, funds utilization, and so on and so forth.
Yes, sir, yes.
At the national level. So it's sort of a bottom-up question, I mean, do the principals...
Yes, sir.
Does the
I would like to
listen
ask about the same system in Singapore. Is it their same in Singapore? Is there similarity?
We can't
Yes,
hear you very well, so...
Hear you well.
Yeah, let Professor answer your question. I think it came on chat, okay? Let's just go ahead and answer that.
Sorry, this is a question with regard to what you were asking?
I was just summarizing for him, and I think he seemed to say that it was in line with what he was asking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in the Ministry of Education, there are two principal sorts of structures. One is the administrative service, which basically is responsible for making sure that the ministry meets all the desires that the government has for education. But there's also a professional wing. And the professional wing is made up of people who have come up through the system. So it's not as if when a new policy is being contemplated, the ministry needs to call up a meeting of school principals and say, what do you think? They have in the Ministry of Education as Director of Schools, Deputy Director of Curriculum, Director of Educational Resources, IT, and all the rest of it in the ministry. So the interaction between administrators who allocate funds or who oversee spending and those who are professionals who say, this will work if you do it this way, this will not work if you don't do it this way. So I think that's where the experience of running the system rubs off on those who are making the policies. but it's not the case. The minister might call in a few leading principals to say, this is what we are planning to do. We have spent 3 months or 4 months thinking about this. This is what our tentative proposals are. What do you think? But it's not as if it is a ground up system. It is a system, again, it's a small system. So it is easy enough to say, we know what is happening at the school level. We know what the needs are. We also have the big picture. Prior to COVID, it was globalization. This is going to change the economic model that we have lived with. What does this mean for schools? We have to create a nation of school leavers who are both entrepreneurs and innovators. Does our school pedagogy provide for this? What do we need to change? So something like a Thinking Schools, Learning Nation major initiative in 1997, Teach Less, Learn More, 2015. These are all attempts to try keep. So let me conclude by saying the ministry is in very close touch with the ground. The ministry knows what's happening in the schools. And the ministry has the confidence and the expertise to say, this is what we will do. This is what we will fund. These are our expectations. And the alignment with ministry. I mean, the director of the National Institute of Education is on many policy-making boards at the ministry. Yet in other systems, you're normally a director of a teaching training college. Ours is much more than that. So in a sense, it's a sort of a unique amalgam of exploiting the small country, the alignment that is available to us, and making sure that the system works and meets our requirements. That's my answer. So it's not as if the unions have, for example, great power in the Singapore school system. The unions don't have that much power. Very little, I would say.
Okay, Miss, going on, Miss Ambika Shrestha, and then after that we will have Chandra NG. I'm just sort of going down the list. Okay, kindly, Miss Ambika Shrestha, you have a comment? Did you have your hand up? You have to unmute.
Yep, you're on screen.
Okay, I am giving question on, sir. In public school, all the students are not access to the internet facilities, and even teachers are not trained enough for a successful internet education. During this pandemic, how should we move forward to cover up the courses among such a high number of students? And how could we cover up the losing education during this period?
Well, Singapore faces the same problem. What in the curriculum can you expect to complete when the time available for the curriculum has been shortened? So again, it is a consideration at the highest level. There are some topics, for example, which are not as important as other topics. And because of the disruption, those topics will not come in the examination. But many people will study only because it's coming in the examination. So this is not something on an individual school basis you can do for high stakes exams, for graduation exams. But internally you can say, well, we lost 8 weeks of schooling. So the time that is available, we will basically drop some subjects. That's a Singapore answer. I don't know what the opposition might be or what the difficulties might be in Nepal, but that's basically what the Singapore answer is. So even in the exams, because parents are very, very anxious about high stakes exams at grade 6, grade 10, grade 12, the ministry has been very careful to say, we are thinking about how to have assessment that will be formative, that will to some extent take teachers' views, not just a pen and paper examination. So you have to make some changes because time has been lost. And you cannot then rush through the curriculum because the curriculum is there. You know, so in theory, in Nepal, it should be possible to say, we will also adjust the examination and assessment. In non-high stakes examinations and assessment, some topics will not be covered.
Students internet access also, and parents parents are low economic condition, so that they cannot reach an internet. Due to this reason, student cannot get benefit in this period. So
I can give you a Singapore answer, but I don't think it will be appropriate. The Ministry of Education discovering that some families don't have internet access or laptops has said that all secondary school students will get a personal laptop or tablet for learning by 2021. So the ministry in Singapore is rich and has resources to say, we will give you the tablets. It's not going to be a possible answer for Philippines or Nepal. But we can do that. So as I said, this is not an answer that I would say that's what you should do. But there may be big corporations, there may be big businesses that may be able to subsidize, that may be able to fund as an act of service to the nation. So it's not as if there is no big companies or no rich people in Nepal or the Philippines. There may be some ways to say, look, this is important. This is for the future. This is how your future workers and future citizens, right? Help us, whether it's with a smartphone or a tablet or internet connectivity. You can try. That's all we can do at this point in time. Or the ministry could say to the big businesses, big banks, please help us adopt a school. These children need this sort of facilities.
Yeah, the government.
Sorry?
The government should be able to do it if they increase the budget allocated to education, and they should do that. But this is the dilemma, I think. And then it's very difficult to find corporate partners to help in every case. I mean, more systemically. Chandran sir, I think we want to move on because otherwise some of these questions might not get to be answered. And after that, we have Zaida Malango. Kindly get ready for your question. Chandran sir, to go first.
Thank you, Dr. Arun, for the opportunity. And first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Gopinathan for enlightening us on the Singapore education system. I'm sure in the presence of the educationists from Nepal here, I could see the presence of Mashram Sharma from the Ministry of Education, the government, the school heads from the government schools of all the 7 provinces of Nepal. I could see the presence of my fellow colleagues, Niladri Bhushan Gurung from CG schools, Sharmila from St. Xavier's School, sort of good variety, a mix of the missionary schools, as well as Kumar Karki from international IWS, that's the Imperial World School, Geeta Kafle, somebody who is a passionate English teacher, Sangeeta from Sanskriti School. So we have a very good mix from Nepal in terms of the government school, the community-run schools, as well as the private schools. We have seen that the Singapore education system is a very, very good example, taking into consideration the economy of, and there is a lot of learning in terms of the curriculum, just as you just mentioned, that the curriculum at this point in the pandemic, like for example, the CBSE curriculum has declared that 30% of the curriculum would be reduced at this time when they're assessing. So likewise, I think our stakeholders, all the personalities that I just named now, could lobby with the government as to how we can also bring down a curriculum, especially for the school leaving students, and also provide the, the necessary facilities of having online classes through the means of providing internet, just only internet, or even a laptop would be a very, very far out cry, if the children could just have the access to technology through a mobile phone or something like that. So I think this will be an interesting lobby for us to discuss in the next 5 days as to how we can go forward and put up a consensus to the government as to what we can do. At the moment, we are lobbying strongly with the government, in fact, fighting with the government as to why can't private school charge the school fees that they have been working for. Because right from the last 3 months, we have been working online. The private schools have been working online, and it's just 1 month that the government schools or the community schools are doing the online classes. So how can we get out of this? And my question, especially now that we have already had 3 months of online classes, the time of assessment has come, and the Singapore external exams or the internal exams are very, very competitive, as what Professor Gopinathan just mentioned, with the records of the scores at the PISA that you have achieved. So how is the assessment done at this time of the pandemic to reach that efficiency at Singapore? And how can we take this into our online classes or our virtual classroom? And how can we make assessment possible at this time of the pandemic? So just these few issues I wanted to raise to Professor. Thank you.
Well, it's getting late, but as I said, this is the article that came out about how the Singapore Examination Board is basically trying to make sure that the assessments are appropriate. I will make this available to Arun and to Suman, and you can all access it and read it. It's a bit more detailed than I would have time to go through, but we are making the adjustment because parents are very anxious, students are very anxious, there's a lot at stake. How can we alter the structure of an established examination system to accommodate new realities? And so, yes, we have paid some attention to it, and you'll find that article interesting.
Okay, we are really running out of time. At 10 o'clock, I think we need to finish. So Zaida, kindly go forward with your question and then maybe some closing remarks. I will mention how we might be able to later on address some of your questions that come up. And also we have 4 more days going on. So this conversation is not ending today. So kindly go ahead, please.
Principal, a school head of a public spread school. Dr. Gopi, I just would like to ask if you have some...
Louder, please, louder.
Yes. Can you share some insights on how you deliver education to children with special needs in Singapore during this pandemic? Maybe I can use that as a school head here in the Philippines for catering children with special needs.
Honestly speaking, I'm not in a position to answer that because it's been a very long time since I was in school. But you will have 2 ex-principals of Singapore later on in the program. And so this question may be more appropriately put to them because I want to make sure that they will give you a correct answer, what they are trying to do or what they know the Singapore school system is doing with regard to special needs. We do have special needs schools which are separate from the regular schools. So that is a variation. We are not inclusive in the sense that some systems are, that special needs children mix with children without special needs. We have a school for the partially blind, we have a school for the deaf, and so on. And so they may be able to explain that a little bit more in detail. And so please wait for the other 2 presentations. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, we've got one very last question. It has come twice already. Somraj Paneruji, please go ahead. And then we will bring this to a close for today.
Everyone here in Nepal, it's almost evening, and so I wish everyone good evening. My question is, in Nepal nowadays it's like a semi-lockdown, parents going to office, they're compelled to go to office, and children are alone at home. And sometimes we teachers, we are facing a lot of problem in getting their attention in the class. When we are teaching them online, and sometimes students come, and sometimes it is difficult to gather their attention. So what system is Singapore following? Because Singapore, comparatively to Nepal, is very much progressive in technology and other things. So what is the system that is being followed in Singapore regarding this this kind of problem? Because maybe in Singapore also parents go to office and children are at alone at home. And how do you keep that record, whether children are attending class or not, what they are doing?
I can give you some general answers because again, Singapore, when we say Singapore families, there are a whole spread of different types of families. In general, because Singapore is a sort of high income country, in many households, I won't say all households, in many households, there is domestic help. So when parents, for example, go out to work, there is someone at home, who's not necessarily a family member, but who's able to supervise children, particularly young children. So they would be the persons who would, if both parents are working, be responsible for making sure some of this thing is done. Second feature would be in Singapore, I would say that parents are heavily invested in education, because for us, the route to middle class success, the route to social mobility is through the education system. You cannot make your fortune as a singer in Singapore. You cannot make your fortune as a football player in Singapore. The highest paid people in Singapore in the civil service all have graduate degrees, right? So a great deal of attention is paid to education. So where parents are able to stay at home, they will basically ensure, to the best of their ability, not every parent is able, not every parent is comfortable with assisting their children, and I won't say there are no issues, but by and large, the responsibility of making sure that children are learning what is being sent over by the school is a responsibility that parents take on. Some do it well, some don't do it so well. So that's the situation. Again, this is new. This is not something that every teacher is comfortable doing online teaching, or that every parent is saying, I'm going to take responsibility for making sure my child finishes all the assignments, my child dresses up in a school uniform and sets it in front of the screen. There's a huge variety of ways. Some do it well, some don't do it well. We're all learning together.
Thank you.
We're all learning
Thank
together.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gopi, for a very, very interesting session today. We appreciate all of your engagement and the questions. We obviously were not able to address all of them. Some of you were able to get the answers. Again, this is not a, we're not going to, this is not a session where there will be clear, silver bullets on exactly this is the answer to this question or anything like that. I think this is more of a discussion session to learn frameworks and models and ideas, so you can yourselves decide what are some of the best approaches to take in your own local context, in your own schools, in your own network of schools or communities, or even in the nation, to go forward to influence the government and the policies and so on and so forth, to take some ideas from these sessions. And we hope that you are taking notes on how some of these things could be useful for your own, in your own context. And I think more of those would be coming as different sort of chapters to this. I mean, tomorrow I will be talking a little bit more about the broader international context, just giving you a sense of what the world out there, including many other developing countries, what are some of the findings and all that, but leading you immediately into more of a discussion on leadership and what does leadership mean, because all of you are leaders in your own schools and in your own communities. So I will be throwing some ideas on that. And then subsequent to that, there'll be other sessions, more in-depth responding to some of the kinds of questions that were raised even today, I think there will be a lot more discussion with our Singapore colleagues on those aspects. So not many of your questions that haven't been answered today may be answered as we go along, more food for thought. And then in the end, we will end with a summary of some of the main issues that were discussed and some pointers for you to take home. So I think overall in 5 days, we hope some of these exchanges would actually be able to seep into your in your own case, and that you could take back with you that would be useful for you in going back to your schools or to your communities and start thinking about implementing some of these ideas individually or in groups or in trying to influence policies and so on and so forth. Anyways, thank you so much. I want to hand this back to Suman, who might have some parting words before the end of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for staying up for this late. And, you know, it's very hard to come after Dr. Gopi and after Dr. Arun to say a few words. It's very, very difficult for anyone. But I will try. I don't think I need to summarize much, as Dr. Joshi has very summarized, and he has set up a ground for tomorrow. And we have shared an article with all of you, but that by Peter Drucker for tomorrow as a reading list. And I just wanted to give like a few examples as I was listening to Dr. Gopinathan very carefully, made some notes. And some of the things going to be covered in coming days. Today and tomorrow, the purpose is to set up a ground, lay out a whole this very high level ground, as you say, leadership, etc. And then we're going to deep dive into schools day-to-day stuff on Wednesday and Thursday. And so some of the questions that you may or may not have gotten answer, you're going to get more answers from tomorrow as we progress, as we get to know more. And I'll just give you an example. Like I live in a district called Fairfax in USA. In our school district, we have 195,000 students. And as soon as Corona hit, the school realized that almost 30% students don't have access to devices, don't have access to internet. And as Dr. Gopi said, the US had resources, they were able to provide that. But in order to provide that, online learning got delayed by 2 weeks because they wanted to make sure everyone has access before they provide the online education. And they didn't do assessment. Fourth semester, there was no assessment. Only assessment in fourth semester was that you could increase your grade by 5% if your grade was less than 75% in first 3 semesters. That's it. And they cut down lots of things by teaching. And now, right now, the school is opening up. And our school district, as we are right outside DC, they always have a pick-up fight with the education ministry. And so there's a big thing because our school district said, in order to maintain social distancing in our Fairfax school district, to manage 195,000 students, they need to build 10 buildings of size of Pentagon, which is not possible. So that's why they have given choices to parents and choices to teachers if they want to come to school and learn and teach for 2 days a week, or they want to do a whole 5 days a week from home. And we have to vote that by 15th of this month. And then based on the data, and you cannot change your answer. Once if you sign up for whole year to be online, you are whole year for online. And so every place is experimenting the way it works in their area. Right? And my brother's family live in Florida. Florida said we're going to open up the school. So I think it also depends on where we are. And I just wanted to share that with you. And the last one that I wanted to share is childcare. And childcare is a big issue right now in US because every parents are home. And I think that was Dr. Somji or so one of them asked a question on that. And right now, if I need a childcare at home, which fortunately we don't need at this point, and it's very hard to find, and it's very expensive. If the babysitter at home you are getting for $10, $15 per hour, right now rate is $20 per hour and more, because you cannot find it. And parents have to work from home. So it's a big challenge, and challenge is opening up opportunity for kids, people who couldn't find a job. They are turning into be a childcare business now. And so every challenge brings the opportunity. And the last but not least, I'll share that I think one of them, Ambika madam or someone asked a question about kids not having access to devices. So last semester in our school district, they realized lots of kids don't have access to devices. So they gave the parents options. They said, if you don't feel comfortable using devices, because if you have 4 kids at home, you have only 2 laptops, what other 2 kids going to do? So they gave them an option to take an on-paper education. So if on paper they were mailing it to on-paper education material to reach home by Sunday, so the next week they'll be covered, and they have to mail back to school on Friday. So everybody is trying in innovative way, in their own way, how it works. And in Nepal, I don't know about other countries, but in Nepal, of course, lots of schools are trying radio and TV and other media, and we'll discuss that more in coming days. Having said that, I will not take any more time, and I just want to thank Dr. Prasad for keep answering those questions that came up in chat to help us reduce the number of questions for Dr. Gopi. And if there are any questions, my colleague Roshan has taken notes of all the questions that came through chat. If there are any questions that we feel that it needs to be answered or it didn't get answered, we'll pass on to Dr. Joshi and Professor Gopi, and they will see if we can send you the answers in email. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening, nice good night, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you all. Good night.
We'll take a group picture. We take a group picture. We forgot about it.
Group picture.
So let's put a camera on, and Roshan, you taking a picture?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, please turn your video for this quick session if you want to be in the picture.
Yes, Sagarji and you and some of them don't have the video on. Nripa, Lakshman.
Video is up, sir.
Okay. You can turn the video on.
I have 4 pages of picture. I mean, screen, a video screen. So give me a second.
It can't be. Okay.
Okay, Roshan, let us know when you're done. So we all smile.
I'm in the 3rd group now. This is the last group I'm taking photo of.
We are smiling since the last 40
Thank
seconds.
you.
Okay.
Okay, everyone picture is done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.